It's week 2 of Flying Friday, a bird-related movie every Friday. Today, I get a look at Migration, which is available to stream in 3D on Vudu. And in many places, it's still even in theaters, going now into its 3rd month after release, which is remarkable nowadays, especially for the 3D edition of a movie. And the stereo is very powerful. What a 3D movie it is. The first thing that struck me is how often the duck beaks poke out of the screen. Not as a momentary effect, those duck heads just sort of hang out there in front of the screen, and it really makes for a nice impression. And when they take to the skies, the 3D remains impressive. The camera will often, perhaps almost always, face down, giving us the landscape as a background. This gives us something to judge the distance by so that we can actually see that the birds are high up, so the sense of 3D doesn't get lost in a clear blue sky. Also, and perhaps with the magic of movie 3D, we see the birds fly in a slightly exaggerated stereo. So the head and wings are seen separated from their own torsos. Other movies might have made them slightly flat to make it all a bit more realistic. Now, if the duckbills weren't enough for you earlier, then we also get bigger bird beaks coming right out at us during what is probably my favorite scene in the movie, where our intrepid family is terrified in the house of their enemy. And often the camera will pick a funky angle that 3D absolutely loves to emphasize the risk of the moment, of which there are many. Overall, there's a bit more stereo than a cartoon typically gives us. And there's just something about that. Very vivid 3D seems to speak to being in danger, and threats just, moments. Surprisingly, there is a genuine nose poke moment that you just don't see anymore in movies. Now that conversions have made 3D an afterthought, there's rarely an opportunity like this fork moment. Story-wise, it's a pretty simple series of adventures. It touches on a few ideas that were also present in the bird movie I looked at last week, Duck, Duck, Goose. Now, if that was a bigger movie, this might be accused of being heavily influenced by it. Just off the top of my head, I can find a few ideas they share. They both heavily feature a pair of herons. There's a promise of love waiting at the destination for one character. There's a kitchen escape, and of course there's a migration. But the former was an orphan story, and this one is a family vacation story, perhaps a bit in the spirit of National Lampoon's movie series. I listened to another reviewer go on and on about the absurdity of much of the plot, especially how the final act is set up by a formerly fearful duck rushing headlong into a completely unnecessary risk. Myself, although I recognized it as a bit convenient, I also found it very human. I once had a conversation with a roofer, the guys who nail shingles and tar roofs. He told me that if he gets a new guy who's afraid of heights, it usually goes away after a few days. But that's when they were most likely to get hurt and needed the most supervision, because the risk would become fun. And they started to have a good time with it, doing silly things, hopping around, and just not taking it seriously. Facing fear has a way of making a person feel invincible. But feeling invincible is just not a great quality for survival. And like the ducks, the elation of discovering a new superpower has you looking for opportunities to explore it. So eagerly running down steps into disaster. Yes, I can absolutely believe that. The self-help guru Bob Proctor called it your terror barrier, the fears that hold you back. His seminars were hours-long encouragement to tiptoe your way to the other side of it. Anthony Robbins was less optimistic. He suggested you needed a bigger pain to push you through the smaller pain. His seminars focused on becoming more terrified of not changing than you are scared of changing, which incidentally is the concept that starts this whole movie going. I almost wonder if he consulted on this. Now, I suppose this movie would feel like a lot of contrived nonsense if you happen to be lucky enough not to have had to bump yourself out of a comfortable rut at least once in your life. But as it is, I can't immediately think of another movie that explores this side of human nature without turning it into an addiction tale. For me, I found it a very refreshing take.